Powerlessness does not arrive with fanfare. It slides in through the doorway of your routine, takes a seat at your desk, and whispers that your work is futile, that your dreams are indulgence, that the world will continue its march without you. But listen, that whisper is not a law. It is a lie dressed in plausible language, a weather forecast that keeps you indoors, when the forecast is only a weather pattern you can outmaneuver. The first act of reclaiming power is not a grand gesture, but a stubborn insistence on truth. The stubborn truth that fear is not your master, but a signal, a prompt, a lever you can pull to reveal a hidden room inside yourself, where the work you were meant to do waits, breathes, and becomes. The trick is not to banish fear with a single shout. It is to translate fear into a sequence of tests that you can run one after another, until the fear's teeth dull and the room brightens with measurable, undeniable outcomes. You do not need luck to begin. You need a method, a compact ritual that converts your own doubt into a ledger of proof. A ledger that refuses to be ignored when the night grows dense and the excuses grow long. In that still hour before dawn, when the city holds its breath and your hands tremble, you can choose a path that is ancient in its logic and modern in its execution. Treat every obligation as a small experiment, a controlled inquiry into what you are capable of producing when you commit your mind, your time, and your name to the action at hand. Do not wait for the sun to rise over a miracle. Instead, lay a sentence upon the page. Post a line into the ether. Set a test in motion that will yield data you can trust. Even when the room feels empty, the mind, once disciplined, refuses to be terrified by the unknown when the unknown is rendered into variables you can observe, manipulate, and learn from. This is the mind Hill spoke of when he urged that success is a science, as much as it is a virtue, that the right mental architecture converts every tremor into a signal and every signal into a step. You begin by naming the fear, naming the cost of inaction, naming the smallest action that would prove you still care about the work you promised to do. It could be a single paragraph rewritten, a single email sent, a single prototype shared with a trusted few. The act itself is not heroic in scale. Its power comes from consistency, from the cumulative weight of repeated proof, from the quiet arithmetic of effort that feminism or fortune or fame cannot counterfeit. If you listen closely to the stories of Edison, Carnegie, Ford, Lincoln, Disney, you will hear not a choir of grand declarations, but the sound of small steps accumulating into a fortress. Edison did not fear failure as a tyrant. He cataloged it. He treated it as data points in a ledger that refused to let him pretend success was a flash of genius, rather than the result of relentless, patient testing. He saved his fear by forcing it to work for him, turning his failures into a formal map that showed him where to place the next beam, the next filament, the next idea that might survive the test of reality. Carnegie did not conquer doubt by preaching charm, but by designing a network, conversations, alliances, obligations, that bound men to him with invisible chains of mutual benefit. He cultivated a social physics, where influence grew not from loud proclamations, but from thoughtful, repeated acts of service and reciprocity, until the weight of his relationships became an engine that could move mountains of circumstance. Ford did not wait for a vision to descend like a gift from the heavens. He built a factory of thinking, a system where discipline turned into freedom, where routine disciplined the chaos of possibility, and where every morning's first move was preordained by a plan that could not be erased by a bad mood. Lincoln did not banish doubt through naive confidence. He forged policy through debate, revision, and a stubborn mastery of the written word that allowed a nation to lean on his clarity. When the world grew murky, Disney did not summon magic from thin air. He walked the floor of possibility. He tested each moment for delight, and he turned those tests into a language others could study and imitate until delight spread like a shared technology. What do these stories give you in your moment of helplessness? They give you a method, a discipline, a grammar of action that refuses to be defiled by sentiment. Mindset becomes the power plant that charges belief. Belief becomes the scaffolding that holds up clarity, vision, and purpose through the storm. Mindset is not a mood you flip on. It is a system you install, a machine you feed every morning with strict inputs, a review of yesterday's proof, a plan for today's tests, a public display of what you will publish by nightfall. The trick is not to conjure courage out of thin air, but to convert fear into a schedule, into a timetable of observable bets you are willing to stake your name on. When you commit to a measurable outcome, you begin to see that fear is not a sentinel at the gate, but a tool in your hand, a chisel you use to carve away what is extraneous, until only what matters remains in the light. The belief that you can is not a wish. It is a forecast with receipts, a certainty earned by repeated public demonstrations that your capacity is not a rumor, but a verifiable truth. Clarity appears as the blade that cuts through the smoke of indecision. When you reduce a goal to one deliverable, the thing that, if achieved, would tilt the entire story in your favor, you do not risk drowning in options. You gain the advantage of focus. Clarity is the refusal to worship breadth for its own sake. It is the insistence that direction is more valuable than dazzling vagueness. Once you own that clarity, vision follows with a stubborn brightness, not as a romantic dream, but as a map you can walk toward, a skyline you can touch with your hands and with your habits. Vision is not a glimmer you chase in the night. It is a plan you can audit, a blueprint you can walk through, a city you can promote from scratch by producing the pieces that allow others to inhabit it along with you, and purpose, the relentless why behind every draft you rewrite. Every conversation you endure, every hour you give to a cause, larger than your own appetite, fills the lungs with a steady, almost ceremonial breath. It makes you aware that sacrifice is not the punishment of a rigid life, but the toll you willingly pay to keep the clock aligned with your deepest convictions. Discipline then arrives as the backbone of your ascent, the quiet architecture that makes every other virtue possible. It is not a drill sergeant's voice, but the patient, strategic ruler who organizes your day so that the essential is never optional. The first hour of the day ceases to be a tentative suggestion and becomes a fortress, an anti-corrosive of procrastination. You arrange your space as if you were building a temple to productivity, a lamp that remains fixed on the desk, a chair that remembers your posture, a keyboard and notebook that speak the same language of action. You remove temptations as a general would remove a flank's vulnerability. You trim your to-do list to the few actions that will tilt outcomes, and you defend those actions with the same resolve a captain defends a front line. The smallest deeds, 5 minutes of focused writing, 10 minutes of reading, a single outreach with a precise audience, are not trivial. They are the stones that compose the wall against the chaos of daylight and the noise of fear. Discipline is the quiet insistence that you will not wait for motivation to arrive. You will manufacture it through the rigor of repetition, through the dignity of showing up when the heart protests, through the stubborn joy of crossing a line you had believed impossible to cross. Then, action. Action is not sentiment in motion. It is a living argument, a public demonstration that your interior philosophy has become a measurable exterior artifact. Edison's ledger of experiments was not a private diary. It was a social contract in action, a demonstration that a stubborn idea can be broken down into a chain of tangible steps all can witness, replicate, and learn from. Your action must be that legible, a publishable draft, a testable prototype, a real conversation that yields a new possibility. Each action should be observable, each outcome shareable, each revision co-created with the world you want to influence. The fear you feel in the morning is not erased by bravado. It is dissolved by the calm, exact motions of constructive work that leave a residue others can point to and say, that is real. And as you ship again and again, you begin to hear that quiet truth settle in your chest. You are not chasing the roar of a crowd. You are building a durable instrument that will outlast the moment when eyes are upon you. Gratitude arrives not as a soft courtesy, but as a strategic lever. Public acknowledgement of mentors, peers, late-night voices that refuse to abandon you becomes a currency that multiplies your leverage, not a garnish on your ego. Gratitude converts opportunity into alliance. It converts scarcity into a shared surplus. It makes your work a joint venture rather than a solitary ascent. When you say thank you with something of real value to offer in return, a connection, a collaboration, a piece of expertise, you sow a seed that will mature into future access, future insight, future support. The world does not reward empty politeness. It rewards reciprocity expressed with competence and generosity. The kind that leaves a mark on a human network so persistent, it becomes a living system around your own mission. Adaptability is not a surrender to whines, but a disciplined responsiveness. It asks you to test, to learn, to pivot with intention, to let data lead your choices without surrendering the core you've sworn to protect. The market shifts. You shift with it, carrying the North Star of purpose into every new channel, every fresh audience, every revised plan. Resilience arises as a disciplined practice of repair. You face the setback publicly. You name the fix. You invite the community to help rebuild. And you reveal the plan with a calm that says, we are still moving forward. This is not a theater of bravado. It is the practical demonstration that leadership is forged in the fires of repair, that you don't retreat from the storm but choreograph your crew through the wind until you emerge with a clearer map and a stronger vessel. Learning is the perpetual engine that keeps the line moving, not a badge collected in a quiet library. You learn by testing and by telling, by inviting critique and by translating critique into action, by distilling the lessons you need to teach others so they can shortcut their own furnace rooms. The greats did not accumulate wisdom to bolt it to a pedestal. They turned wisdom into a public collaborative craft. So you train yourself to publish, to teach, to invite correction, to implement the correction, and to repeat until your practice becomes a language others can adopt. In that sharing, you discover the most radical truth of Hill's philosophy in a modern tongue. Success is not a secret handed to the few who stumble upon it. It is a system that makes the many capable of producing outcomes that endure. And through all this, the fear that gnaws at your sleeve reveals its true face when faced with a ledger of proof. It recedes not in the blaze of sentiment, but in the glow of consistent, credible results that no one can refute. You learn to smile at the memory of the powerless night, not because you forget, but because you know you have already forged your response. A cascade of steps, a rhythm of actions, a chorus of proofs that prove to the world, and most convincingly to yourself, that you are not a casualty of circumstance, but a craftsman of your own destiny. The modern Napoleon Hills of today do not promise a shortcut around the work. They promise a map through it, a toolkit that converts fear into form, despair into data, and potential into a life you can stand in, unshaken, day after day, year after year. The road begins with one decision, that you will begin, and ends only when your voice, your hand, and your unyielding will have become one instrument, singing a single unbroken melody. We do not surrender to powerless feelings. We transform them into power through craft, through focus, through a publicly proven, relentlessly practiced art of building, brick by brick, proof by proof, toward a horizon that belongs not to luck, but to your unbreakable decision, to begin again, to ship again, to stand again, and to keep building until the world cannot help but witness what a determined life can achieve when fear is converted into the simplest, most undeniable currency of all, results. The mind, when pressed hard enough, learns to speak in a language that fear cannot understand, a dialect of evidence and consequence that silences the gasping excuses you once wore like a cloak. You do not conquer powerlessness by collecting pretty slogans or by waiting for inspiration to shuffle into your room with cheering fans. You conquer it by building a staircase. You can walk even when the lights are dim and the audience has vanished. If the first segment laid down the creed, fear is a data point, not a verdict, then this segment must show you how to translate that data into something you can live by, something that can be seen, touched, and measured by people who have never met you but will judge your results by the same rules they use for themselves. Mindset is no mere mood. It is the constant energy that compels your systems to operate. When fatigue gnaws at your bones, when your calendar yawns with open spaces that tempt you to drift, when the echo of past failures still rings in your ears. It is the engine you service every dawn with the same ritual. Review the last 24 hours not for sentiment, but for verifiable outcomes. Inspect the next 24 hours not for hope, but for a roadmap of actions that will yield proof you can point to at sunrise. Belief in this modern retelling of Hill's ethics is not a whisper in your chest that grows louder with prayer. It is a wager you stake publicly and repeatedly until it earns the right to be called a fact. You begin by declaring a measurable outcome, and you defend it with a schedule that refuses to bend to the weather of mood. Then you test the belief with a suite of small, observable commitments. A page revised on the screen, a client call logged, a return email written with a voice that can be replayed in another day and be trusted again. Each commit is a brick laid in a wall that fear cannot breach, because the wall is not built from bravado but from receipts. Receipts that any observer can verify, reproduce, critique, and improve. Think of Edison again, not as the solitary genius who woke with a flash of insight, but as the man who colonized failure, who turned each failure into a signpost and used the signposts to forge a highway others could walk with him. Think of Carnegie and Ford again, not as oracles of destiny, but as cartographers who drew maps by reading the land, who invited others to step onto their routes and carry the map farther than one pair of hands could ever reach. Your belief mimics that. Your belief becomes a public instrument, a form of capital you invest in days that people cannot forget, because the results illuminate the night and become a reference for what is possible when a person refuses to quit. Clarity now arrives as a scalpel that refuses to permit ambiguity any longer. Clarity demands ruthless pruning of options until there is a single, unambiguous path that you can walk with your eyes closed and your hands steady. The world calls this discipline focus, but it is really the refusal to pretend that breadth equals power. When you claim a target with specificity, by Friday, by the end of the sprint, by the moment the sun hits your desk, you do not merely set a date. You create a boundary around your own attention, a fence that prevents your mind from wandering off into the bazaar of competing desires. Vision then climbs into the cockpit, not as a distant star, but as a flight plan. You can narrate to the winds and to the ground crew. It is the skyline you will push toward, the rolling hills you will conquer, the neighborhoods your work will change, not in some vague metaphor, but in concrete, palpable shifts in how people experience your craft. And underneath this vision lies purpose, an iron spine that bears the weight of late nights, early mornings, and the stubborn questions your critics will raise. Purpose is not a rumor you repeat to yourself. It is a charge you shoulder in front of witnesses who demand gravity, not glamour, from your every move. Discipline then shows up as the quiet, relentless examiner of your day. It is not a harsh master. It is a precise partner who ensures that your choices align with your declarations. The dawn does not reward wishful thinking. It insists on action that can be named, graphed, and defended. Your environment must be a cathedral of concentration, not a marketplace of distraction. A lamp stands as guard at the edge of your desk. A chair remembers your posture. A keyboard becomes the instrument of your own character, not the toy of your shifting moods. You design the day so that the habit of excellence is the most natural thing in the world, so that when you sit before the page or the screen, The first sentence you write is not a victory lap, but a statement of intention you can stand by again and again. The smallest deeds matter, not because they are grand, but because they are true. 5 minutes of mindful writing, 10 minutes of listening to critique, a single outreach to a person who might catalyze a leap. These are the bones of the body that carries you through dull days, through the yawning hours, through the moments when you feel you cannot go on and yet must. Action is the heartbeat of transformation. It is not mouth-born enthusiasm. It is kinetic, visible, shareable, auditable. Edison's laboratory is the prophecy, a universe where a chain of little experiments, logged with precision, becomes a library of certainty that anyone could follow. Your actions must be legible to others, because your life is not a private theater, but a public performance, in which the audience is not merely passive. It is a partner, a co-creator, who can add leverage, critique, and momentum. Your action cannot be a splash of bravado. It must be a sequence of deliberate steps that can be mapped, measured, repeated, upgraded. When you publish a draft, when you test a prototype, when you reach out to a partner and you hear the word yes, or you hear the word not yet, and you respond with a better plan, you convert fear from a phantom into a tool whose bevels you can adjust. The world does not reward the loudest claim. It rewards the most reliable follow, through the person who ships with a quiet confidence that says, I am not asking for permission. I am building a door you can walk through. Gratitude arrives like a wind at your back, not as a polite breath, but as a gust that lifts you toward new shores. When you name the people who helped you, the mentors who stood in the shadows and spoke in decisive whispers, the peers who mapped out a path with you, the strangers who offered a chance when you needed it most, you do not build a monument to your ego. You construct a bridge across the abyss of possibility. Gratitude transforms opportunity into alliance. It turns a one-time favor into a recurring source of strength. You reciprocate not as a ritual, but as a discipline. You give something of value back. You create a system where generosity multiplies. You build a culture where success is not a solo ascent, but a shared ascent. Adaptability becomes the art of turning the weather into a craft. It is not surrender to circumstance, but a rigorous, constructive response to change, an ability to keep your ship on course while you reconfigure the sails. You test relentlessly. You choose the route that produces the most reliable return. You hold your core objective, but recompose your tactics to reach it with greater precision. Resilience then stands as the reflexive act of recovery. You debrief the storm. You publish the lessons learned. You mobilize the people who care to help rebuild. You present a plan that makes the next ordeal a little less costly, a little more predictable, a little less devastating. This is leadership not in the theater of triumph, but in the quiet arithmetic of how you stand up again after being knocked down, how you reset again, how you sharpen your team's capacity to withstand the pressure of uncertainty without losing sight of the horizon you are building toward. Learning remains your constant companion, not a dusty shelf in a library. It is the craft of turning experience into a public, shareable craft, the art of distilling hard, one insights into tools others can borrow and adapt. You teach not as a missionary, but as a craftsman who understands that the loom of knowledge grows richer when more hands weave with you, when critique becomes co-creation, when mistakes are celebrated as necessary mentors and not as verdicts on your character. The most daring learners are not those who hoard insight, but those who distribute it freely, because the act of teaching forces you to sharpen your own understanding and to clarify the language by which you communicate the truth you have learned. And as your learning multiples, so too does your influence. Your work becomes a language others speak, a framework others trust, a path others choose because they believed you could show them how to walk it. So this is the spine of your ascent, a lineage of small public proofs that quarrel with fear, a daily ritual of discipline that makes certainty possible, a ruthless honesty in action that invites the world to judge your results and help you improve, a heart big enough to acknowledge the hands that lifted you, a mind nimble enough to pivot without relinquishing your core, a thirst for learning that makes you a beacon rather than a lighthouse that only shines in calm seas. You are not chasing a dream. You are setting a standard that refuses to bend for the easy road, a standard that invites the stubborn, uncomfortable work of becoming a person who can be counted on when the night is darkest, a standard that makes fear explainable and thus manageable, a standard that makes power not a spark you catch, but a continuous flame you tend with relentless care. The world will still whisper about luck and timing and the one-off genius who happened to be in the right place at the right moment. You will quiet that whisper by presenting a chorus of evidences that cannot be dismissed. The time you showed up when no one was watching, the page you published when you could have waited, the conversation you steered toward possibility, the plan you laid bare to the world and watched it respond with better questions, better resources, better collaboration. And as you ascend from this moment, you will understand that the real victory is not an applause, but the habit of becoming someone who makes the extraordinary ordinary through constant, disciplined, public proof that fear is not the master of your fate, proof that you are not a spectator of your life, but the author of a narrative where resilience, learning, and action reveal the truth, that the human spirit, when precisely harnessed, can transform a lifetime of potential into a history of undeniable achievement. From this moment, the mind will stop hedging and start hammering. You will hear the quiet arithmetic of courage in your own chest, and you will answer not with a shout, but with a sequence, a chain of deliberate actions that no one can refute, because the proof is visible, tangible, and undeniable to anyone who looks. Powerlessness dissolves not in the elixir of inspiration, but in the stubborn construction of a staircase you can climb when your legs feel weak, in the stubborn insistence that a single well-placed step can bear the weight of a future you have yet to inhabit. The old fear, the ghost that once haunted your desk and perched on the edge of your ambitions, retreats when you replace longing with a plan and replace hope with a record of things you have already done and, more importantly, of things you will do. You convert potential into a schedule, and that schedule becomes the only map you trust, the only compass you follow, the only authority that can quiet the loudest inner critic. The trick is not to pretend the fear is not there. The trick is to show fear how small it becomes when you line up your actions like soldiers, when you align your breath with the cadence of your commitments, when you let failure step forward first, so you may measure its impact and then walk around it with a steady pace that says you know the terrain, and you will not lose your footing again. This is the core of a modern articulation of Hill's creed. Success is less a miracle than a method, less a moment of lightning than a long, deliberate storm that you shepherd with your hands, your voice, and your unyielding resolve. Mindset in this refined telling is not a mood to be chased like a bright feather drifting across a quiet room. It is a machine you assemble with your own hands, a device that converts pressure into clarity, threat into inquiry, panic into a plan that you can explain to a room full of skeptics and still leave them with nothing but the weight of your certainty. You begin with the recognition that every fear is a data point, a metric, a line on a ledger you can audit and expand. So you replace the vague dread with a concrete hypothesis. What is the smallest action I can take that will reduce the distance between me and the outcome I crave? You answer with a test, a micro deed that costs almost nothing but yields a harvest of understanding. A paragraph rewritten, a call returned, a prototype sketched, a public post made, a critique invited and faced. Each action is a nail driven into the door of doubt. And with every nail you feel the hinges tighten, the door widen, the possibility of walking through it grow more certain. Belief then rises not as a fragile bloom in a sheltered garden, but as a weatherproof tower built with receipts, with outcomes that can be shown, verified, and defended under the fiercest daylight. The greats did not rely on a fevered impulse. They relied on a disciplined wager placed again and again until it matured into a fact that could not be ignored by any reasonable observer. Edison's perseverance, Carnegie's patient leverage, Ford's systematized zeal, Lincoln's exacting public mind, Disney's fearless trial, and error choreography. They did not win on a whim, but by turning belief into an instrument, a lever, a tool for edifice. Clarity lands like a blade that slices through the fog of indecision, leaving the path unmistakable behind it. If the mind had been a garden of distractions, clarity would be the gardener's decisive shears, trimming every branch that does not bear fruit and shaping the remaining branches into a single, robust trunk. You want something that can be measured not by the distance to your dream, but by the proximity of your next tangible signal, a deliverable that, when held up to the light, shows its edges and corners and is ready to be touched by someone else's hands. By Friday or by the end of this sprint, you declare one unit of progress so precise that no debate can obscure it. And you break that unit into the smallest possible tasks, micro milestones that can be verified by a timestamp, a screenshot, a fragment of code, a piece of copy, a design mock, each piece a brick in the wall that cannot be knocked down by the weather of mood. Vision follows with stubborn optimism, not as a romantic dawn, but as a schedule you can walk into a future you have already sketched in your notes, in your conversations, in your collaborations. It is not a dream you wake up from. It is a future you wake up into, with every action preparing the ground for the next, with every test confirming you are on the right road, with every critique shaping your map so that those who follow you will not stumble in the same way you once did. And beneath the vision lies purpose, which does not purr like a comforting cat, but roars like an engine, a motive force so essential that you would pay the price of your own comfort to keep it alive. A reason so compelling that it makes late nights a privilege, not a punishment. And the cost of quitting become a debt you refuse to repay, because the debt to your future self is far more valuable than any momentary relief. Discipline here is the quiet yet inexorable engine of momentum. It does not wear a loud uniform, and it does not demand noise from the world. It wears a steady morning routine like a badge of honor, and it treats the desk as a sacred workshop, where every tool is arranged with surgical logic so that the mind, when it enters, is already oriented to produce. The first hour is no test of endurance. It is a ritual of respect. Respect for your past self who kept promises, for your future self who will thank you for the present sacrifice, for the work that will bear fruit only when your hands are willing to do the unglamorous, unsexy, necessary labor. You design the day as if you were building a cathedral, the windows of attention facing outward, the buttresses of integrity, holding steady, the stones of routine laid one by one with a guardian's care. The smallest deeds, 5 minutes of focused reading, 10 minutes of deliberate practice, a single precise outreach, are not trivial. They are the mortar that binds your ambitions to the reality you inhabit. You do not chase the next flash of inspiration. You cultivate the weather that invites it, the soil that nourishes it, the pace that allows it to bloom when the world is ready to notice. This discipline is not merely self-denial. It is self-respect, the recognition that your life is too valuable to be left to caprice or chance. Action becomes your most lucid argument, a demonstration that your inner theory of progress has been tested in public and found sound. Edison's chain of experiments was not a personal diary. It was a public promise that precision plus persistence yields a predictable harvest. Your actions must carry that same weight, a publishable result, a verifiable outcome, a conversation that opens a new door. Each action should be visible to the world, shareable with peers, improvable by feedback, and scalable by collaboration. It is not the roar of a hero, but the steady drumbeat of a craftsman who knows that the most consequential progress is often quiet, incremental, and verifiable. The fearless are not those who shout their advancements to every ear. They are those who ship with enough regularity that the world cannot help but adjust to the rhythms they set, who earn trust through reliability, who prove again and again that acts of maintenance and creation are one and the same discipline in a life that seeks to be enduring rather than ephemeral. Gratitude adds the essential texture of humanity to this fortress of achievement. It is not a garnish, but a vital beam, transforming scarcity into abundance by reframing every encounter as a potential alliance. When you acknowledge the hands that built your path, the mentors who dared to speak truth into your ears in the darkest hours, the peers who carried the weight with you, the strangers who offered a lifeline, you create a chain of reciprocity that magnifies opportunity and anchors trust. Gratitude multiplies influence, not by softening your spine, but by widening your circle of possible collaborators, turning every exchange into a seed that, if watered with competence and generosity, blossoms into mutual advantage. You do not exploit gratitude as a tactic. You deploy it as a culture, an ongoing practice of giving back, of paying forward, of building a social architecture that sustains momentum across seasons of failure and success alike. Adaptability follows as the art of steering without losing the ship's sense of purpose. It is not capitulation to wind. It is a disciplined recalibration of sails in response to reality, a willingness to test new routes while keeping the course toward the essential horizon. The market will tempt you with glittering detours, and you will learn to recognize the difference between a shortcut that accelerates toward the true objective and a diversion that robs you of time and focus. You test multiple paths. You measure their outcomes. You retire the paths that fail the test, and you invest more heavily in those that yield durable proofs. Resilience stands at your back as the habit of recovery. You debrief, you articulate what went wrong, you publish the plan to repair, you mobilize the network to assist, you adapt, and you emerge with sharper instincts and a calmer resolve. It is not a glamorous theater of endurance. It is the practical discipline of coming back stronger, of turning a setback into a setup for a better strategy, of showing the world that your commitment is not a reaction to trouble, but a declaration of your unshakable trajectory. Learning remains the restless flame that keeps the furnace hot. It is not the passive soaking in knowledge. It is the active translation of knowledge into capability, the transfer of theory into tools, the public sharing of trials, so that novices and veterans alike can accelerate their journeys. You do not hoard insights. You publish them. You teach them. You invite critique. You incorporate the critique. You put the new version into the world. You watch the world respond. You refine again. The masters did not keep their wisdom behind a locked door. They opened the door wide and invited others to walk through with them, uncertainties in their pockets and questions on their lips, because truth multiplies when it is tested in the company of others. And as your learning expands, so too does your leadership, not because you command more people, but because you inspire a culture where people feel safe to test, to fail, to rise, to contribute, and to grow together toward outcomes none could achieve alone. The journey you walk is not a solitary lecture, but a shared ascent, a coalition of individuals who refuse to be defined by their moments of fear and who instead define the moments that follow fear with evidence that cannot be disputed. You will find that the enemy of power is not weakness, but denial of the facts in your own hands. You will discover that the antidote to scarcity is not wealth alone, but the habit of giving enough to attract more from those who want to share your mission. You will realize that the horizon you pursue is not a payoff at the end of a day, but a city that grows with every day you choose to show up, to ship, to learn, to give. When you finally reach that threshold where the ledger glows with the light of consistent proofs, you will understand that the real conquest is not the conquest of markets or acclaim, but the conquest of yourself, the petty doubts that haunt you, The soft lies you tell to keep a minute longer in bed. The convenient excuses that drain your energy and dissolve your resolve. You will understand that you are capable of more than you ever dreamt. Not because you are luckier or wiser by birth, but because you refuse to surrender to a single night of powerless isolation and instead built a durable bridge to the dawn with your own hands, your own voice, your own relentless discipline. And in that dawn, as you stand at the edge of your own creation, you will hear a single clear truth that rings through the hallways of your life. This is what it means to be alive in the era of action, to be a mind that learns, a heart that endures, and a will that transforms fear into a concrete, public, undeniable reality. Brick by brick, proof by proof, day after day, until the horizon itself becomes the monument to your unyielding decision to begin again, to ship again, to stand again, and to keep building until nothing you imagined remains unseen by the world you have chosen to serve. Power begins not with a fever of craving, but with a stubborn, unromantic decision to turn the fear you feel into a platform for evidence, a ladder you can climb even when your legs are aching and your nerves feel frayed. The mind, when pressed hard enough, stops pretending it is a quiet room and becomes a workshop where every thought is a tool and every doubt a material to be shaped. You are here to perform a real act of reclamation, not to indulge a craving for inspiration that dissolves the moment you face the first obstacle. The trick is not to cancel fear with fireworks of bravado, but to convert fear into a measurable sequence. Tests you can run, data you can read, proofs you can parade in front of anyone who cares to judge you by results rather than by promises. In that transformation, you discover the ancient modern truth. Power is not given. It is earned, line by line, day by day, through a discipline of observable action that compounds until the sum of your efforts becomes a force the world cannot ignore. We begin with mindset, because it is the perpetual engine that breathes life into every other virtue. Mindset is not a mood you flip on when the sun is shining and the coffee is hot. It is the engine you start when the world is dim, when deadlines loom, when the mirror tells you what you fear most about yourself. Hill's spirit would remind you that success is a science as much as a sermon, that the right mental architecture converts every tremor into a test, every test into a decision, every decision into a result that speaks louder than fear. So you wake with a chart in your head and a ledger in your hands, yesterday's proofs reviewed, today's bets sized, tomorrow's hazards anticipated and priced. You do not permit fear to masquerade as wisdom. You diagnose it as information, strip it of its theater, and insert it into a plan that respects the cost of inaction as much as the risk of trying. The stories you carry from Edison's labyrinth of filaments, Carnegie's quiet network, Ford's factory floor, Lincoln's editorial discipline, Disney's floor, walking imagination. These are not relics you admire. They are living blueprints you imitate. You learn to translate the language of fear into a language of proof. What is the smallest action I can publish today that will be undeniable tomorrow? What is the data I will collect that makes my intention more credible than my doubt? When you ask these questions, you do not feed your fear with more appetite. You starve it with discipline. And the fear shrinks to the size of a single question to which you already know the answer. Yes, I will act. And yes, I will publish. Belief then grows not as a soft conviction, but as a public wager that earns its own credibility in the light of action. You declare a measurable outcome, and you stand by it with a schedule that refuses to bend to circumstance, to whim, or to a weather of mood. You test your belief with a gallery of small, observable commitments, a revised page that can be read by anyone, a client conversation that can be replayed in a week, a prototype that can be touched and critiqued by peers. Each commitment is a brick laid into a wall that fear cannot breach, because the wall is not built of fancy rhetoric but of receipts, evidence that can be shown, reviewed, debated, and improved. When Edison treats failure as a tutor and a notebook, when Carnegie guards his relationships as a royal asset, when Ford engineers a system that makes discipline feel like freedom, when Lincoln wields the pen as a weapon of policy, when Disney tests delight as a craft, these are not legends to be memorized. They are methods to be practiced. Your belief mirrors that practice. You must demonstrate to the world that what you claim you can do is not a wish, but a forecast with data behind it, something you can defend under the harsh light of scrutiny and still move forward with confidence. Clarity follows belief with a relentless, surgical precision. If belief is the engine, clarity is the ignition switch that fires up the machine and keeps it running when roads turn dark and the road ahead seems uncertain. Clarity is not a pleasant luxury. It is the ruthless discipline of asking, what exactly will I deliver? By when and in what form will the world interact with it? You reduce the vast field of possibilities to a single, non-negotiable target that can anchor your day and your night. You break that target into milestones that can be checked off with timestamps, screenshots, prototypes, or lines of copy that anyone can verify. Vision follows not as a dreamy horizon, but as a forecast you can walk toward brick by brick with a calendar as your map and a heartbeat as your drum. Vision is the public plan you share with collaborators, a skyline you can point to and say, here is where our work will bend the arc of reality. Underneath that skyline sits purpose, not a soft aroma of altruism, but a heavy practical motive that makes sacrifice rational and necessary. Purpose makes the late night grind sacred, makes the no days off commitment reasonable, and makes the cost of quitting a debt you cannot repay to your future self. Discipline is the quiet architect of momentum, the patient craftsman who makes sure that every nail you drive into the day holds, does not bend, and contributes to the integrity of the whole structure. It is not a harsh drill sergeant, but a trustworthy steward who protects your time and your focus. The dawn becomes a sacred moment, not because it is holy, but because it is earned. A ritual where you set your intention, arrange your tools, and enter the zone where you are most likely to produce something of value. Your environment must be tuned like a precision instrument. A lamp that shines on your work, a chair that supports your spine, a keyboard and screen arranged so that your eyes travel in a straight line to the target and back again with every stroke of effort. You prune distractions with surgical care, not with a sense of deprivation. You shield your attention much the way a captain guards the helm against a sudden squall. The smallest deeds, 5 minutes of deep work, 10 minutes of reading, a targeted outreach, become mortar for the wall you are building around your life. You do not chase grandiose sparks. You cultivate the steady flame that can survive the longest night and still burn bright at dawn. Action is the expression of truth in motion, not a rhetorical flourish, but a public, testable demonstration that your inner ideas have courage enough to leave your mouth and gravity enough to land in the world. Edison's chain of experiments was a public promise, proof that method and persistence can outrun luck. Your actions must be legible to others, reproducible by colleagues, improvable by feedback, scalable by collaboration. Each action should be a clear signal to the market, the audience, your partners, and your future self. This is real, this is moving, this is provable. You do not pretend to be fearless by shouting. You become fearless by delivering repeatedly, by posting drafts that invite critique, by releasing prototypes that invite use, by having conversations that invite collaboration. The fearless do not seek noise. They seek outcomes that others can touch and feel and build upon. With every published page, every shipped feature, every documented experiment, you layer the world with trust, and trust is the weather under which courage can grow and thrive. Gratitude, the quiet multiplier, makes all the grinding feel less solitary and turns every ascent into a shared journey. You call out the mentors who cast light into your tunnel, the peers who carried you through the hard miles, the beginners who remind you of the contagious hunger that keeps you sharpened. Gratitude is not a sentiment. It is a strategic asset that expands your reach and tightens your leverage. When you publicly acknowledge help, you do more than pay a debt. You invite more minds to join your mission, more hands to lift the load, more voices to challenge your thinking and refine your approach. Gratitude builds the culture you want to inhabit, a circle where giving is as valued as receiving, where helping others is not charity, but an investment in the ecosystem of momentum you depend on to survive the inevitable storms. Adaptability is the art of adjusting without surrendering, of bending the plan until it becomes more elegant and more effective, not of dumping the plan because the world seems unkind. You test relentlessly. You pivot toward the path that yields the cleanest, most verifiable progress. And you keep the core objective intact while you recompose tactics to reach it. Resilience is the backbone that supports your pivot, the discipline that learns to heal quickly and to communicate openly about what happened, what you learned, and how you will change. You debrief publicly, you share the blueprint for repair, you invite the team to help rebuild, and you emerge with a strategy refined by the very test that nearly broke you. This is not a glamorous drama of endurance. It is the practical demonstration that leadership is forged, not by avoiding pain, but by converting pain into a sharper plan and a clearer path forward. Learning continues to be the flame that makes the furnace of your life bright. It is not about stacking books or buffering on the shoulder of a mentor. It is a living public apprenticeship where you test ideas, invite critique, apply what you learn, and teach others what you learned so they can shortcut their own journeys. The masters turned wisdom into a communal craft because they understood that knowledge accelerates when it is shared. You write, you publish, you teach, you correct, you rebuild, you repeat, until your craft becomes a language others naturally adopt in pursuit of their own breakthroughs. And as your learning deepens, your leadership grows not from a louder voice, but from a clearer, more convincing demonstration that you can guide a complex effort through uncertainty and into tangible, repeatable success. So in this second act, you are not a mere observer of your fear, but an engineer of your fate. You are not waiting for luck to rescue you. You are drafting the terms of your own rescue, brick by brick, proof by proof, day after day. The world will seek shortcuts, will trumpet bright promises and quick wins, will tempt you with the glow of overnight success. You will resist those temptations by reminding yourself of the ledger you are building. The height of your credibility is the consistency of your proofs. The horizon does not tremble because you are lucky. It trembles because you are alive to the discipline of your own design, because you have chosen to live by the creed that fear is not a verdict, but a signal, that power is not a gift, but a practice, and that the era of action rewards the patient, the precise, the publicly proven. This is the anthem you carry into the days to come, a discipline that makes you trustworthy, a courage that makes you transparent, a craft that makes you indispensable, a vision that makes your work matter, a life that makes fear irrelevant because you have already converted fear into a series of steps that cannot be undone. And so you step forward, not with hollow bravado, but with the quiet, unbreakable certainty that beginning again is not a failure, but the only honest way to begin anew, to ship again, to stand again, and to keep building until the world finally looks at your life and says, here is a person who refused to surrender to powerless feeling and chose, instead, the enduring art of turning potential into public, undeniable results.